Well, the government has announced a significant boost to Australia's plan for domestic guided weapons manufacturing and acquisitions. Joining me now live is Professor Peter Dean, Director of Foreign Policy and Defence at the United States Studies Centre at the University of Sydney. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Peter. This was a key part of the Defence Strategic Review, of which you were one of the co-lead authors. What's your reaction to today's announcement?
Well, this is a very positive move in the pathway towards our guided weapons enterprise. As you mentioned, the guided weapons enterprise is a key pillar of the strategy that's embedded within the Defence Strategic Review that the government has adopted. So along with programs like AUKUS and, of course, other programs to develop capability, this is really going to sit at the centre of what Australia is developing for its defence and security going forward. And as we've seen from the lessons from Ukraine, for instance, but not only are these particular capabilities, the prism missiles, the GMLRS missiles that are launched out of the HMAS batteries, critically important on the battlefield. The ability to manufacture them domestically is absolutely key to Australia's sovereign defence capability.
2025 is when the government says that it will actually begin manufacturing these missiles. Is this an ambitious target? Have we got the resources to begin production then?
Look, I think this has been underway in development between Lockheed Martin Australia and the government for quite a while. One of the great advantages and steps forward we saw at the end of last year was the passing of legislation in the United States Congress and Senate that will allow for the transfer of the technology so Australia can have access to the IP and the materials necessary to manufacture these in Australia. Now, that is a reflection not only of our close strategic partnership with the United States, but a realisation from the United States that they need to empower allies like Australia and Japan and others more, that we need to develop a much bigger industrial base. And this has been one of the really key things that's come out of the lessons from the war in Ukraine, Russia's illegal conflict there, is that we need to develop the Western industrial base to ensure that we have the levels of readiness and preparedness industrially to be able to deter any future adversaries, but of course if conflict plays out, to be actually able to have the munitions and capabilities to defeat any attack on Australia or in the region.
And Australia is acquiring its first batch of precision strike missiles. What is the capability of these and how do they compare with, say, long-range missiles?
Yeah, so we've been on a development pathway here, so with the United States through the HMAS system, which we now are acquiring. So we're talking about the development and manufacturing of GMLRS and then the precision strike missiles. So at the moment, the capabilities of these missiles is about 40 to 70 kilometres. The extended range GMLRS and the manufacturing those domestically will take that range out to about 150 kilometres. And then the precision strike missile will go in excess of 500 kilometres. And this is really critical. It was the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, which had kept a cap like the 500 kilometre range globally on some of these systems. But of course, we know both China and Russia had been breaking that treaty for year after year after year in developing their own capabilities. So eventually the United States withdrew out of that treaty because it was just completely defunct by the work that China and Russia was doing. And so this is about us catching up in terms of range. This is about us developing, which is particularly needed in the Indo-Pacific, which is very long-range capabilities. So this is a development pathway. This is about putting us the steps, as you said, to put in place the manufacturing capability. And one of the really key critical things to this is not only the transfer of the technology, but the development of the workforce. And we know that we've got one of the lowest unemployment rates for 50 years. There is a very high demand on skilled tradespeople and technicians. And we're going to need some very highly capable people to work on these manufacturing areas for Australia, along with the nuclear-powered submarines that we'll be acquiring.
And just before we let you go, the Albanese government is yet to fulfil its promise to increase the number of Australian defence personnel in Bahrain to help combat the rapidly growing crisis in the Middle East. What's the argument for Australia actually increasing its personnel in the first place?
Yes, well, this is an interesting development. I think the government's got it right here. It is a little bit surprising that those personnel haven't got there yet, but I would say that comes more down to the time of year that it is in Australia. A lot of the ADF personnel are on leave or returning from operations and preparing for the new year. I would say this is about identifying the correct personnel. We do have a relatively small defence force, so these are some specialist positions that we would have to identify the personnel, remove them from their current posting and prepare them to go overseas, which cannot always happen, on a turn of a dime. But what we're doing here is our contribution to the rules-based international order, in particular the global commons of the sort of economic superhighway that we have, which are the oceans of the world. This is critically important. Now, what's happening in the Red Sea is a long way from Australia. Australia is a contributor to that global system, and this is our small contribution to that. So other countries that we've seen, such as Great Britain and European countries, NATO countries, have provided ships to that task force, and that's all good and well. The Australian government decided not to do that, and I think that was a correct decision because our focus is actually on the Indo-Pacific. So we're tasked with looking after the sea lines communications in our own region. We have the third largest exclusive economic zone of any country in the world. And of course, we're committed to also supporting neighbours such as Malaysia and Indonesia, and working with other states in the South China Sea and in the South Pacific to ensure that the same global commons are operable for all economies for the transport of goods and services.
Peter Dean, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.